Hello, my name is Emily Mora, and I would like to thank you for joining this presentation on behalf of Decoding Dyslexia North Carolina. Our workshop today is on universal screening, understanding school literacy screening. Our objectives for this workshop are to talk about the purposes of universal literacy screening and what information they provide, North Carolina's policy on screening, understanding mCLASS DIBELS results. DIBELS is the set of literacy screenings subtests used by North Carolina. What happens next based on those results? And then tying into that, not quite the same, but beginning and end of grade reading assessments, specifically looking at third grade, and parents' rights surrounding literacy screening and response. First and foremost, what is the purpose of literacy screening? This is stated beautifully by Dr. Adlof, who is a professor at the University of South Carolina, that all students participate in universal screens, so universal meaning everyone, to identify risk for reading difficulties, and their reading progress is monitored at regular intervals. So screening tools such as DIBELS can be used not only sort of as check-ins to see, are students making the growth they should be making? Are they performing on par with their peers at the same point in their education? And if a student is identified as struggling, those same screening tools, such as DIBELS, can be used to monitor progress. So maybe a child is being provided some supplemental additional support to help with reading skills. These screening tools can be used to make sure that that supplemental support is providing benefit. And you'll notice throughout the slides, I have links that go directly to the document or article where I pulled the quote or graphic from. I will be posting a full set of the slides with clickable links on the Decoding Dyslexia North Carolina website so that you can access all of these resources and peruse and read them for yourself. North Carolina has laid out their literacy intervention best practices, right? That everyone should be screened for potential reading problems. Differentiated core reading instructions should be provided for all students, right? So we have that core instruction, but tailoring it to each student or small groups of students' individual needs, supplementing that core quality classroom instruction with tier 2 and tier 3 support for students who are struggling. And we'll get into more about what I mean by tier 2 and tier 3, and then to monitor progress. So if we are providing some additional support to a child that's struggling, is whatever we're doing, is it a value to their time and our time as a whole, and getting that child on track? Again, I have a direct link to that complete document. North Carolina has a Read to Achieve program. And this is just, in essence, a summary here that all students entering kindergarten, K through 3, are screened to ensure proper development of language, literacy, and math skills. And the screening also will help guide what core instruction should be provided to the whole class, and then who might be needing supplemental support. And that supplemental support may also include reading camp. It may also be included in the decision of whether a student is promoted to the next grade, specifically third grade, advancing on to fourth. There were some changes in 2021 made to the Read to Achieve program, which I have linked here in the Excellent Public Schools Act. And then I have a link to the full guide document that lays out what the plan is for Read to Achieve. One of the biggest takeaways in the Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021 is they added in a lot more language about science of reading. So whatever core curriculum or supplemental support a school in North Carolina is providing. It should all be materials, tools based on scientific research around reading development and intervention. And there are decades and decades of wonderful literacy research done all over the country, all over the world, and that should be guiding what we do in our classrooms. I am recording this in January 2023. So some of North Carolina Department of Public Instruction's guidelines surrounding universal screening are new for this school year, 2022 to 2023. Certainly what I'm saying in today's video could change in future years, but as of this school year, some of these points are new. NCDPI, the Department of Public Instruction, requires that all students be screened K through 3 times a year, beginning, middle, and end of year. Results must be shared with families. Throughout the state, statewide, North Carolina is using Amplify's DIBELS 8 to do this universal literacy screening. It can be used for screening and for progress monitoring. There is also a Spanish version, mCLASS Lectura, which can be used with students. And the DIBELS subtests look at some of the key elements that a student must have these skills to develop into a strong reader: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So syntax comprehension skills. So those 5 areas are looked at via the DIBELS screening. And you can see in my image here on the right that the screening subtests vary some from grade to grade. So this chart kind of lays out what is done. Nonsense word fluency, word reading, oral language, and vocabulary are looked at across the board, K through 3. The letter naming, segmenting, oral reading fluency, and maze subtests vary some depending on the grade. There is a lot more information about this at the links I have to the left. We have Amplify's North Carolina page. And I also have a link to a white paper published by DIBELS and the University of Oregon talking about using DIBELS as a dyslexia screener. And just a little bit more, DIBELS is 8th edition. There have been a variety of editions over the decades. It is heavily researched, developed, and produced by the University of Oregon, the University of Oregon Center for Teaching, and it's based on over 30 years of research. DIBELS stands for Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. And I also made a note, charter schools are not required to use DIBELS. This was just a great graphic I found on the Center for Literacy and Learning website, which I have linked there, that kind of sums up, as it says, it's a simple view of reading. So to be a strong reader, meaning reading to gain meaning, right? You need 2 core skill areas. You need to be able to recognize and read the words on the page. You need to have oral language comprehension skills. So I use that word reading and my oral language skills, put those together, and I have sort of the ingredients I need to develop as a strong reader. I sort of overlaid my own image on top of this simple view of reading image. Those pink boxes show which subtests on the DIBELS screener are looking at each of these areas. So, okay, that word reading, decoding ability, that is being tapped into by the following subtests: letter naming, segmenting, nonsense word reading, and oral reading fluency. Those oral language skills are being tapped into with the oral language subtest and the vocabulary subtest. And then sort of that consolidated view, putting the reading and the language skills together, there is a maze comprehension subtest. And I'll dive into a bit more about each of those. And just to tell you all, this concept of the simple view of reading being made up of strong language skills and strong word reading skills has been around for decades. It was Goff and Tunmer in the 1980s. They were researchers who first sort of coined this phrase and discussed this theory. Here is another view and great graphic from the Center for Literacy and Learning, known as Scarborough's reading rope. And it shows you, whereas this was a simple view of reading, we know that reading is not simple at all. This shows you a bit more, breaks apart a bit more the complexity involved in reading. Again, we need strong language skills, oral language skills, and we need strong word reading, word recognition skills. So those have to weave together to allow a student to develop into being a skilled reader. And I put arrows next to the areas that, again, are tapped into by the DIBELS screener. So vocabulary is looked at, language structure, syntax is looked at, phonological awareness skills, decoding skills, and sight recognition skills are looked at. So not every single area is looked at, and they're not looked at in great depth. That would require, a full, thorough evaluation, assessment. And that's not the point of a universal screening. It is meant to be quick, but to be very effective and efficient at picking up on students and skill areas that may be needing additional support or additional assessment. Here is a real example of a North Carolina mCLASS Home Connect report sent home to a first grade family. You can see this is first grade beginning of year assessment. And as you remember from the previous slide, your child is supposed to be screened 3 times a year, K through 3rd. Up in the upper right, you will see it says last assessment, and it said July 27. This was a year-round student. So this was that beginning of year testing. And then it will also specify when is that middle of year testing going to occur. For this student, it was November 28th. Right up at the top, you see a number in the hundreds and it's circled. This is the student's composite score. So tabulating, and it's going to be weighted in different ways. The different various subtests may not be weighted equally, but the subtest scores come together to form an overall composite score for the student, to give you just a single data point that gives you an idea of the student's risk for struggling with reading. And there is a link here to a great document that explains in detail the value of that composite score. But overall, that composite score is a strong global predictor of risk. And again, it's a weighted combination of scores. So, and in this case, the student had a 347, it's green, and anything, as you'll see down here in this key, anything color-coded green or blue is at or above benchmark, where we want a student to be. Scores that are in the yellow and red are below benchmark or well below benchmark. So let's talk a little bit about each of these subtests so you have an idea of what skills they are tapping into, and what information they may be giving about how your student is doing with their reading development. First up, and again, remember, not all of these are given at every grade, but this is a first grader, so letter naming is still given. For most of these subtests, they are each just 1-minute activities. And again, for most of these, they are done one-on-one, teacher and student, 1-minute presentations each. For this activity, a student is given rows of a mixture of upper and lowercase letters. They have 1 minute to name the letters as quickly as they can. So this is giving an idea, obviously, the student's letter knowledge, But once a student is old enough, clearly, hopefully by first grade, a student knows all of their letters, and they can now identify them readily. So all the letter names are stored in their long-term memory. That then allows this screener to sort of do double duty. It also acts as a rapid naming or RAN assessment, which gives a little glimpse at a student's processing speed. So my student is in first grade now. She knows all of her letter names. Well, great. How quickly, though, can she look at that letter, identify it off the page, pull the letter name from her long-term memory and spit it out, right? How quickly can she process through that? That is why they've got a minute. How many can they name? How rapidly can they name those letters? And there's a lot of research around rapid naming, or RAN, rapid automatized naming. It can be a strong predictor of future reading ability, and it's especially linked to later fluency skills. So kind of how quickly and efficiently a student can access the words on the page, which we know is really crucial for comprehension. Next, we have a phonemic awareness subtest, segmenting words. So for this subtest, again, the student has a minute, and the teacher will say a word, and it may have 2 or 3 or 4 sounds in the word, for example, and the student has to break up the word into sounds. As they give you the example here, if the teacher said sun, can the student break that apart and go s, So can they hear all the different phonemes or sounds in that word, and can they isolate them, break them off? Being able to hear the different sounds in a word, pull them apart, put them back together, and manipulate those sounds, which all falls under that umbrella of phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. Research has shown there is strong correlation between weak phonemic awareness skills and weak and difficulty with reading development. Next up, we have some decoding, some reading activities. Nonsense word reading. There are 2 scores for this activity. Again, the student has a minute to read a list of nonsense words. The beauty of a nonsense word reading task is these can't possibly be words that the student has seen before and has potentially just memorized. These are going to be words that require the student to look at each letter and match it up with the associated sound, if they have that connection made in their memory, right? So if it was VUM, the student is going to need to go and say VUM. The student will get 2 scores for reading these nonsense words. First, it says reading letter sounds. So how many sounds out of that nonsense word did they identify correctly? And then reading whole words. How many whole nonsense words did they read correctly? So for example, if I read VUM, if I read it as bud, I won't get credit as reading it correctly whole word, but VUM read as VUD, I would get credit for the V and the So 2 scores there. This really taps into and is a great way to show how strong is my students' letter sound knowledge. When they see a given letter, do they immediately connect it with a sound, an associated sound, or sounds in memory? Next up, we're still reading, but now these are real words, accurate and fluent reading, real word reading. We have got reading common words. And this is going to be, again, these are real words. So some of them a student may not have seen before, and they need to break it up and decode it, figure out how to pronounce it before they say it. But given that these are real words and some common words, high frequency words, they may be words that are already in the student's long-term memory, right? So how many of these words can the student read accurately? And in addition to that, this word reading common words subtest is going to be a mixture of regularly spelled and irregularly spelled words. So words that can easily be sounded out, so C-A-N, K-N, right? That's a common word, but it can also be sounded out. Whereas the word of, not so regular, right? If you attempted to do that, you would probably say off, right? And which is not of. So it's a mixture of words that can be broken up and decoded, other words that have some irregularity to them. And then our last reading section here is connected text reading. So you're getting 2 scores. They're looking at the student reads a passage, a grade level passage for a minute. How accurate are they? So how many words did they read correctly in that minute? And what was their fluency score? So they're reading the words, they're reading them accurately, but how quickly are they doing so? If it's very slow and labored reading, that is a warning sign that yes, maybe they're accurate, but they're reading so slowly that there's a good chance that that will impact their ability to effectively comprehend the text, because they're spending so much time trying to figure out the words and going word to word to word. They may be losing some of that content and meaning along the way. One more subtest on this page. Oral language. So this is looking at a student's syntax, grammar knowledge. It seems very simple, but research has shown that this is an effective way to get a peek at a student's language syntax, is having students repeat sentences of longer and more complex length and seeing how accurate they can be. It can be easy to repeat Kate ran, right? But it may not be so easy to repeat. After the 12 hours of snow, the family was required to shovel for 6 hours, for example. So we get much more complex sentences. And if a student does have language deficits and syntactical grammar difficulties, they're going to have a hard time chunking those longer sentences, holding them in memory long enough to spit them back out. So this is in essence a repetition task, but it can get quite challenging for some students. And again, another 1-minute task done one-on-one with the teacher. On the second page, you will see our other oral language subtest, vocabulary subtest. And it's going to be tapping into tier 2 and content specific grade level vocabulary. There will be, for example, fill in the blank questions, matching questions to assess the student's knowledge on the definition of content specific and grade specific words. Given that this is a first grader, there's one subtest that you may see on your home report. I'm just going to move back here. That I did not mention, and that's that maze comprehension subtest. A beginning first grader wouldn't have that yet. But in essence, a student is reading a passage or passages, and every 7th word is deleted. So the student is left with 3 words to choose, which word makes sense to fill in the blank where that word is missing. So the student has got to incorporate, they've got to have those strong word reading skills to read the passage. And they've got to incorporate that with their language skills to understand the passage, to figure out what should go in that missing slot. So that's the maze comprehension subtest. Okay. And I also wanted to point out, as you noticed on that first grader's report, beginning of year, their composite score was a 347. Well, DIBELS has published in their materials, which I linked to earlier, kind of where those cut scores are for each grade, beginning, middle, and end of year. Your student needs to score at or above a certain composite to be within that low risk range. And obviously that student was 347 beginning of year first grade. And you can see a beginning of year first grader, we want their composite to be 330 or higher. So that student was. Okay. Usually there is an additional page when you get that mCLASS report home, it shows all their results. And then there's an additional page that highlights any areas from the screening that it appeared the student might need some extra support. And for this student, they said accurate and fluent word reading. And you will notice that was the only subtest, accurate reading, when she was reading that passage aloud for a minute. That was the only area that fell in the below benchmark area. So they highlight that at the end of the report, and they give you a couple of activities that you could do to help support that at home. And then they also link to mCLASS has a Home Connect page with more activities organized by skill areas that you could try at home with your child. Certainly, I would recommend talking these ideas over with the teacher as well to see how they recommend you reinforcing skills at home. Another thing that DIBELS is able to do, in essence, these subtest scores go together not only to produce a composite score, but they also go together to produce a lexile score for your student. And a lexile score is essentially giving an idea of your student's reading level. One thing I like about lexile, there are a variety of different entities that sort of provide levels of students reading. I like that lexile not only will they give you information on a student's reading level, they also have lexile values for books. So this can be helpful if you find out, for example, it looks like my student was a 450 lexile level per their DIBELS screener. Well, you can go to the lexile website, and I have the link here, and you can search for child-friendly books that are around a 450 lexile. You can even search by, oh, they love animals or they love sports, and I want it to be this lexile level, and it will give you an idea of books you might want to look for at the library or the bookstore. That could be a good jumping off point. This should be a book around my child's level. And then if they read that book and they just breeze through it and get every word correct, you're like, oh, maybe we could try a 500 lexile book next time. You could bump up a little bit. Or you get a book that says it's around 450 lexile, and for whatever reason, they really struggle on it. You know, I'm going to look for a bit of a less complex book next time. So I like that lexile sort of scales student level and book. So this just gives you an idea that end of year, springtime, 50th percentile, so your student kind of right there in the middle, in second grade, for example, is around a 425 lexile. And then 90th percentile, so student up at the higher end may be closer to 795 lexile. So that's just sort of an added piece of information. You may not see this. Let me show you. Up at the top where that composite score is reported, that's also where the lexile score would be reported if it's added on to your mCLASS report. If you don't see it there, just speak with your classroom teacher and say, hey, I know I just got that mCLASS report home. I was wondering what lexile level the mCLASS report was saying that my student is at. So you can always ask that. All right, so we've done this screening with our students in the classroom. Well, what's the point of it? What's supposed to happen after that? Well, it's supposed to drive response by the grade level team, the school team, the classroom teacher. School teams will meet to review the data. Globally, they're going to look at the data. What if every person in the class, or the vast majority in the class, really struggled with letter naming? Well, that tells us we may need to make some adjustments to our tier 1, our whole class instruction, right? To get everybody where they need to be, to match up with their peers across the United States. Additionally, they want to look at these scores and say, okay, what individual students are needing additional support? And that you may hear it called tier 2, tier 3. And I have another slide on this, but in essence, tier 2 is some supplemental instruction for a student who is having some difficulty. Tier 3 is instruction that is more intensive, more likely a student who is showing much more of a delay, much more of a struggle with a skill. So we need to intervene with those students who are falling in the red and the yellow, right, on the DIBELS. And we also want to think, okay, how is what I'm seeing on the DIBELS matching up with what I'm seeing in their classroom performance? They were scored in the red on the DIBELS, but are they doing phenomenally in the classroom? That could happen, probably not too likely, but could happen. More likely, if they're in the red on the DIBELS, it's probably showing up. You're seeing that in their schoolwork as well. So we need to intervene, and not only do we need to intervene, we need to progress monitor. So checking in every week, every 2 weeks, depending on what type of support is being given, to see, okay, whatever additional supplemental support we're giving this student to try to get them back up in the green, right, at or above benchmark, is it working? Is it helping? So we may use some of those DIBELS subtests to spot check along the way to see if they're making progress. Again, an excellent quote from Dr. Adlof from the University of South Carolina. She sums it up for us. Students who are flagged as at risk by the screens and those who fail to make adequate progress in response to evidence-based instruction are moved into increasingly higher tiers where the instruction is more explicit and more intensive. So the groups may get smaller, the instruction time may get longer, and where progress is monitored more frequently. Students who demonstrate a need for the highest levels of support may be considered for special education services. And again, I have a link to that full research article. Okay, so a little bit more about tier 2 versus tier 3. They are both going to be very systematic and explicit, right? Whatever the area of weakness is, we are going to be demonstrating, explaining. I'll do it, then we'll do it together, then you'll go and try to do it by yourself, and we will just teach a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more. And along the way, we will review, add a little bit more, review, add a little bit more, review. So that's what we mean by very systematic, very straightforward and explicit. The biggest difference between tier 2 and tier 3 is likely that tier 3 is most likely moving at a slower pace. It may also be smaller group. It could even be one-on-one. It may be more frequent that you're meeting tier 3 than tier 2, and the student overall may be needing more supports. For example, more modeling from the teacher, more visual aids, giving them little reminders and cues of what to try. Again, all of this is laid out in North Carolina's documents, which I linked to earlier in the slideshow. Okay, I will probably say this is, to me, maybe the most important slide, or second or third, and at the very least, the second or third most important slides. We see that a child is struggling. We see they need some extra support. We figure out what we're going to do for that extra support. Well, we need to monitor to make sure that that extra support is paying off. So crucial, because if it's not paying off, what do we need to change? Do we just need more of it? Do we need to completely change how we're approaching it? What do we need to do? Because we don't want to waste the students' precious time. We need to get them caught up. So I'm directly quoting here from this DIBELS document from the University of Oregon, page 97. It's so important, though, I want to read directly from it, and then I will talk about the graphic. Okay, DIBELS 8 recommends for determining response to intervention relative to goals for student growth. Specifically, we recommend setting an end-of-year goal for a student where the default goal will typically be the end-of-year benchmark cut score. When graphed, student scores on progress monitoring administrations should be mapped relative to an aim line, which is drawn from the benchmark result that occasioned intervention to the end-of-year goal, so long as student scores hew closely to or above the aim line, the student shows signs of response to intervention. Okay, what in the world does all that mean? Well, I found this beautiful chart, nice and simple. It is not from DIBELS. I have a direct link to it here. It's from a classroom, CBM, Weebly site, but it gives you a great visual of what I'm referring to. So let's say Susie really struggled on nonsense word reading. So I know she is struggling matching the visual letter with its representative sound, right? So we are going to work on those grapheme phoneme letter name skills, letter sound skills. The red arrow is pointing to the starting point. Again, this is all completely facetious, but it gives you a good visual. Let's say she's starting off here at the blue dot. Well, for her to be at benchmark by end of year, she's got to get up here to 14. Again, arbitrary number. The aim line is that straight line I draw between where she is right now and where we want to get her to be at the end of year, that EOI goal. That's our aim line. And as DIBELS points out, when you do progress monitoring every week or 2 weeks, and you have her do nonsense word reading, you want to see those dots, those data points moving up, 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 either on that green aim line or maybe just below it or maybe even above it. That would be amazing. But what if we check in and the dots are hovering way below that aim line? What DIBELS is recommending is that if a student obtains 4 consecutive data points below the aim line, it indicates the need for either a change in intervention or potentially a need for off grade level monitoring. So don't try an intervention for 6 months and not keep track of whether it's actually helping the student or not. No, regular checking in. If we see 4 data points below the aim line in a row, this is telling us something is not right. We are not fully meeting the need of the student. What else is needed? So I just think this is really crucial, and it's laid out very clearly what DIBELS is recommending. And as it does point out, if a student is potentially so far behind grade level, it's possible that you may need to be using lower level. So if they're in 5th grade, but their reading is around a 1st grade level, we're not going to be able to progress monitor with 5th grade level reading tasks. We may have to start lower, and obviously with the goal of as rapidly as we can get back up to grade level materials. And that could be happening through this tier 2, tier 3 supplemental support. This could be happening through special education services with the student having an IEP. Okay. Again, new this school year, 2022-2023, statewide, in addition to using DIBELS, North Carolina is training districts on new documentation for students who are needing additional reading support. It's called an IRP, an individual reading plan. So students who are triggered on the DIBELS assessment or another assessment that, wow, they are not where we need them to be, this should be triggering the school, the team. This student needs a reading plan. Let's get something in place so we can get them back on track. This is the one document I want to click through and show you right now because it will be really helpful for you to see it. Again, this school year, training is happening across the state. This may not be being used at this very moment in every district, in every school. It's in the implementation stages this year. You may still see multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS documentation, sort of older documentation being used this school year, but this is what is coming down the pike and may potentially already be underway in your school. So the individual reading plan is going to first talk about, okay, what's the current core instruction that everyone is receiving in the classroom? Then it's going to get into what areas is this student needing support? Are they needing that tier 2 supplemental support, or are they needing that more intense tier 3 support? What skills do we need to work on? Phonemic awareness, phonics skills, or fluency skills, or written expression? And okay, what interventions are we going to be using to target those areas of weakness? When is the intervention going to begin? And a description of those interventions. Has the parent or guardian been made aware of the interventions? And then getting a little bit more into the nitty gritty, exactly how often is this support going to be given, days of the week, right, times, the duration of the sessions, how many students will be in the group, who will be leading this group, and to be able to measure that growth, again, we'll have that sort of starting point, and then we'll have our goal point higher up, draw that aim line, and monitoring progress frequently. Are they making gains? But to be able to do that, we first need to have that baseline data, which we got from the DIBELS universal screener that everyone gets. And then, reviewing the intervention plan. So is the student trending upwards with their goal? Are they seeing these skills generalized in the classroom? There's a log where every time the student participates in this this additional support, you can put the duration, the group size, comments. So the idea is for everything to be housed in one place, well documented for the team to see, and hopefully for it to be, shared and expressed to the family as well. Okay. So in addition to that school year support that a student may be receiving, a student could be invited to North Carolina's reading camp. And I just quoted directly here. Again, I have links to the North Carolina Reading Camp documents. It is, quote, a focus on explicit and systematic instruction in the foundational reading skills of phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension based on the student's need. It is 72 hours of instruction, and it is supposed to include as much small group practice and instruction time of just 3 to 5 students as possible. It primarily is focused on 3rd and 2nd graders, but schools may invite struggling 1st graders to the reading camps as well. And I encourage you to click these documents that I've linked to that give you a lot more information about the North Carolina statewide reading camps. This gives you an idea. Okay, so what determines if a student is invited to a reading camp? Well, you can see, though, that DIBELS composite score, which we talked about earlier, students who score below these benchmarks, these cutoffs, beginning, middle, of end of year, if they fall below that, they could be invited to camp. So yeah, for example, at the end of 1st grade, if you haven't hit a 441 or higher for that composite score, they are eligible for Read to Achieve's reading camp. And there's also criteria for 2nd grade. And then for 3rd grade, they look more closely at that Lexile score. If a 3rd grader hasn't hit 725 Lexile reading level, by the end of 3rd grade, they would also qualify. There's also a potential that they would look at that student for potential retention. Okay. Again, I'm not going into this extensively, but there is a document that explains further, along with like a visual flow chart of what a student is expected to achieve by the end of 3rd grade. And if they don't achieve that, what might be considered, what might be done. So we want our 3rd graders to reach that 725 Lexile reading level or higher. We want that student to receive a 3 or higher on the BOG or EOG reading assessments, right? But there are also other options. There's a student reading portfolio, which is an option for a student who may not be able to sit down and do that lengthy BOG or EOG testing, read all those passages back to back and answer questions. It allows them to sort of gradually accrue and show their knowledge throughout the school year. But again, this document I've linked to, specifically pages 64 to 67, get into this in a lot further detail. Just to give you just a glimpse, what do I mean by these third grade, beginning of grade, and end of grade reading assessments. What do these reading tests look like? Well, in essence, these are third grade level reading passages. It's a mixture of fiction and nonfiction, and each passage will be followed by a set of multiple choice questions. Some of them, the student can find the answer literally very straightforward, word for word, back in the text to be able to answer the question. Others will require the student to do some inferencing and draw on their background knowledge to be able to answer some of the questions. So they're kind of different levels of difficulty and complexity for the questions, but basically reading passages, answering multiple choice questions. Okay. In all of this, again, this is sort of my tie for most important slide. In all of this, you have rights. Your students have rights. You have the right to access all universal screening results. So you should be getting those DIBELS mCLASS results home. You have the right to ask, what Lexile level did my student achieve on their DIBELS assessment? You have the right to know if one of those individual reading plans is going to be put in place for your student and what is going to be done. How are you going to progress monitor? What type of support is it going to be? How big of a group is it going to be? You have the right to know all of those things, and you have a right to your students' records. I have a link to an amazing document by Duke Children's Law Clinic. Specifically, page 118 to 119 gives you a sample letter for requesting your child's school records. You have the right to request a meeting with the teacher to discuss the supplemental support your student is getting or should be getting, and to review that individualized reading plan with them. You also have the right at any time to request a formal evaluation for possible special education services if a disability is suspected. Again, I have links to specific pages in the Duke Law handouts, as well as your disability rights in North Carolina. But in essence, especially for specific learning disability, if we are looking at a student who is struggling with reading and writing development, of course, falling under that umbrella is dyslexia. Yes, it is crucial to see how a student responds to some tier 2 and tier 3 support. I apologize for that noise. It is important to see how your student responds to that support. And that can be a part of the evaluation for special education services. But that tier 2, tier 3 support cannot stop you from requesting a formal evaluation. So at any time you can request an evaluation. It doesn't matter if they've already tried tier 2 support or not. You can request that evaluation. That starts that window, that clock of time that the state has to abide by. And yes, during that assessment window, if they agree to evaluate, they can do some tier 2 and tier 3 support, because that can be helpful data when you all meet back together to discuss whether or not an IEP might be warranted. But they cannot say to you, nope, take your request for evaluation back. Let us do some tier 2, tier 3 for a few months, 6 months, whatever. And then if it doesn't go well, then you can request an evaluation. That's not how it works. And if you're told that, that is incorrect. Please join our email list here at decodingdyslexianc.org. You'll stay up on all of our new and upcoming events and guest speakers we have. If we can help you with any questions regarding what was discussed today or anything else regarding your child and reading, writing deficits, disabilities, and support in North Carolina, feel free to email us at decodingdyslexianc@gmail.com. I know that was a lot of information, but I think it's really important information. And to me, the key takeaway is there are helpful tools in place in North Carolina, these universal screeners and these individualized reading plans. But all of these elements are only as good as their accurate usage, right? So we want to stay on top of the screening and the support that is being done with our children. Is it being responded to the way that it should be? I see that they're struggling. What are we doing about it? And then are we checking in regularly and monitoring? Is it actually helping? If not, we need to be doing something different, or possibly an IEP, an individualized education plan, is warranted. So I hope that that was helpful for everyone. Again, you'll have access to the slides, so you can access all of those links with a wealth of additional information. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Hope to see you again at a future session.